In this week's episode of Salesforce Revenue Cloud Office Hours, we're going to talk about annual recurring revenue, annual contract value, monthly recurring revenue, and monthly contract value, why those matter to a business, and how we can calculate them using Salesforce CPQ. When I post the video for this in the show notes, so to speak, to my website, garvinsconsulting.com, I will also include the formula calculations that I'm using, the formulas, so that you don't have to try to parse through them in the video itself. They'll be on the website for you to use. I want to build a very simple solution designed for calculating these values to save you time, energy, etc., and ensure that you're calculating them correctly. The formulas that I'm going to use go all the way back to the steel brick community, where some of the original people who used the product or created the product came up with these themselves. That's where their legitimacy comes from. So don't take my word for it. Trust the people who wrote the software. Usually. Although that becomes more and more of a question in recent years. Let's talk about what these numbers mean. I'm going to use a peanut butter and jelly membership to do this and to continue discussions of subscription functionality in Salesforce CPQ, how we can calculate the value of those subscriptions, not only for the whole, say, 36 months of the subscription term, but what is a year of that worth? What is a month of this subscription worth? How can we calculate that? How can we share that information with the right stakeholders? There will be a technical portion of this where I'm building fields and price rules and things. And there will be a functional overview as I go to talk about what I'm doing and why it matters to the business. To begin, I will create a quote on this opportunity. I don't think I created my new quote button yet, which I usually do. I'll create a lightning action or lightning quick action or action, whatever the hell they're calling it these days. I'll create one of those called new quote. I'll throw it up here at the top of the opportunity. It makes it easy to create a quote and pre-populate values. But since I haven't done that yet, I will go old school and create a quote this way. This will be a primary quote. The opportunity will be my PB&J membership. The account is the University of Arizona. And that's all I will worry about right now, except maybe I'll populate my start date. Am I looking at it? There it is. Start date, April 1st. Subscription term, 36 months. As far as people, that'll be me, and that'll be Jane Gray at University of Arizona. So using an action for this is a lot easier. It's more intuitive for the user as well. Less stuff for them to remember. I'll edit the lines. I'll use my standard price book. That updates again the standard price book lookup on the opportunity, and it also updates the price book on the quote itself. I'll add products. Here I see the PB&J Club membership and the support that I have created in a past episode. For this example, we're going to use the PB&J Club membership. This is a standalone product in this case. It's also part of the PB&J Sandwich bundle, but for this example, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible to make it easy to understand what's going on. PB&J Club membership is $10 a month. I have one license for $10 a month for 36 months. That gets me a net unit price of $36 $360, and a net total of $360. If the quantity was 10, we can see how that adjusts. Now the net unit price for one of these memberships is multiplied by 10 to get us to 3,600. Similarly, if it was 100, there we go. $36,000 worth of PBJ Club memberships. Fantastic. I'll go back to the number 10 for the sake of this example. When we start talking about TCV, or total contract value, this is what we're talking about, the $3,600. This contract that will generate, or the subscriptions from this contract that will generate, is worth $3,600. But how much is this subscription worth per month? I know that for 36 months, one of these is worth $360, and I know that 10 of them is worth $3,600. But what is 1 month of 10 worth? What is 12 months of 10 worth? Wouldn't it be useful to know that? How much money per year am I going to generate from this contract? How much money per month am I going to generate from this contract? Those are numbers that matter a lot to subscription-based businesses. In particular, SaaS businesses where the vast majority operate on a recurring revenue model. They care very deeply about monthly recurring revenue or monthly contract value, MRR, MCV, and they care a lot about annual recurring revenue and annual contract value, ARR, ACV. At Salesforce, ACV is the name of the game. How can we increase the annual contract value of this customer? We might do that through selling new products. We might do that through uplifting prices. We might do that through increasing quantities. There are a number of ways that we can increase the ACV of a customer, and that's the name of the game. It's that death by 1,000 cuts. It just gets a little more expensive all the time. And over time, we go from an annual contract value of $1,000 to an annual contract value of $2,000. And we've doubled the revenue of the business. So we want to look at things at those different scales. What is the total contract value worth? What is the monthly contract value worth? What is the annual contract value worth? If I get to something like, say, 5 years, that's 60 months, it's $6,000, but I still need to know on a monthly basis, what is the price or what is the value of this? And on an annual basis, what is the value? We're going to use a combination of fields across objects and price rules to calculate this. The actual architecture of this solution is very simple. We can use some price rules and a couple of fields to do this, but we can add additional value to this calculation of ARR and MRR if we also add twin fields to the mix. So we can take the data calculated by the CPQ quote calculation sequence, and we can take that data and push it to other parts of the system to give us additional insights across our data structure. For this example, I'll continue to use 36 months. This will be our test quote that we'll use to run this, and we will elaborate from there. All right. When I calculate these values, I want to think about the values that I'm calculating, where I need those data points to live, how I'm going to use them now and in the future, how they may or may not relate to other business processes and business functions. So let's take MRR, monthly recurring revenue, or MCV, monthly contract value, and let's calculate those for this quote. Now, if we think about where we want this data to live, we ultimately want to know the value of this quote and therefore the value of this opportunity. Wouldn't it be nice if on my opportunity, I was able to see the amount, but I was also able to see the MRR and the ARR, or the MCV and the ACV of this opportunity right here? Wouldn't it also be great to see the non-recurring revenue? I want an understanding not only of my recurring products, but also my one-time products. That would be very useful because now we can start to get a more nuanced understanding of the opportunity. We know that the total deal size is $1 million. Well, how much of that is one-time money? How much of that is recurring money? Because this might look like a really great opportunity for $1 million, but we realize that only 50,000 of that is recurring revenue and most of it is one time. That might be fine. But if our business goal is to create recurring revenue, then we want to make sure we have a deep understanding of what our recurring revenue is, especially if we're in scenarios where we're either looking to go public, to be acquired, maybe do some acquiring and add to our portfolio. Private equity firms that invest in or purchase software companies are really big on these numbers, and they can affect the valuation of a business to an extreme degree. As a general principle, the more recurring revenue you have, the more valuable the business, because we know that we have money coming in the door all the time. If the only revenue that you get is one time, your business can be very lumpy. We're trying to smooth out that revenue over the course of the year. And the ACV number specifically, or ARR, is going to help us understand just how smooth is our revenue. If we have a nice smooth base of, say, $1 million a year from recurring revenue, and we have maybe another $1 million that comes in through various one-time sources, the revenue of the business is $2 million. Fantastic. And we know that the recurring revenue is $1 million. So we have this platform that's sitting $1 million off the ground. That's the base. When you get more sophisticated with this, you can also start to think about the churn of how many customers fall off. This matters a lot in my jiu-jitsu business, for example. If I have 20 members and one of those members leaves per year on average, then I have a churn rate of 5%. 5% of my customer base, or 5% of that revenue, falls off every single year. Any subscription business is going to have some churn. That's part of the game. And if you have an accurate understanding of what your ARR and MRR is, and you understand what your average churn rate is, you can more accurately predict the future revenue of your business and make decisions based on those factors. But where should that data live? If I want to see all of that information here on the opportunity, from where does it need to originate to get it here? If we think about the data model of the opportunity, we have two major components. We have the opportunity and we have the opportunity products. In this case, the University of Arizona PB&J membership opportunity and the PB&J club membership opportunity product. If I want to summarize and roll up ARR, MRR, NRR on the opportunity level, what I could do is I could get that data on the product record itself. What is the ARR, MRR, and or NRR of this particular opportunity product? And then the sum of all of my opportunity products for those different fields can be rolled up because of the master detail relationship between the opportunity product and the opportunity, for me to do roll-up summary fields on the opportunity and display those values. Fantastic. But where do these numbers come from? These numbers are going to come from the quote. But if I think about the data model, the quote is not actually where these values need to be calculated. The quote, like the opportunity, is a summarization of its underlying elements, the quote lines. The most granular level at which we can and should calculate these numbers is the quote line level. There's also a master detail relationship between the quote and the quote lines. So if I calculate the values at the quote line level, I can roll those up to the quote level. And because of the twin field functionality of CPQ, I can also take those values from the quote line and move them over to the opportunity product. We can talk more about twin fields in a future episode, but for now, suffice it to say that generally speaking, all of our calculations need to happen at the quote line level. One, because that's where the quote calculation sequence happens. Number two, we need to capture everything that happens from a pricing perspective on that quote line from an auditability point of view, so that in the future, after we've gotten money for the things that we've sold, we can go back from the invoice to the order to the quote line to find out the origin of this money. I have an invoice of $1,000 for these products. Great. What orders and order products were used to create that invoice? We go back one step. Fantastic. These are the orders used to generate that invoice, but where did these orders come from? These orders came from this quote. We're trying to go back to the beginning. In an ideal state, you'd even go so far as to go back to the lead. We went to a conference, we met this person, we got their business card. That converted into an account, an opportunity, and a contact. That opportunity then had a quote generated on it. We added some quote lines to that quote. We sent them the quote document. They signed it. Everything was great. Now we booked an order for that quote. We generated an invoice for that order. We collected a payment for that invoice. We got the money from the payment, for the invoice, for the order, from the quote, from the opportunity, from the lead at the conference. And we could go forward and backward all the way. And that becomes very useful when making decisions because we can look at the money we actually get from our invoices for the business, and we can start to prioritize. We do this marketing activity all the time to try to generate leads, but we never make any money from it. Or the opposite. We do this sort of activity on the marketing side, and that generates most of our money. So let's ignore those other marketing channels. Let's double down on what's bringing money into the business and make our business more efficient. That's a much longer conversation, so I will get back on task here and talk about creating these MRR and ARR calculations. Again, I need to get that data to the quote line level so that I can roll it up to the quote level. This is where we need to be knowledgeable about core functionality on Salesforce and the limitations around it. The quick solution, somebody might think, would be create a formula field and put the formula in there to calculate it. And that works. You can certainly use a formula field to calculate ARR, MRR, NRR on the quote line, but there's a problem with that design. And the problem with that design is that in Salesforce, you cannot do a roll-up summary field on a formula field because there's too much stuff happening. We need a more elegant solution, or we need a solution that's going to align with the way Salesforce core works, but still leverage the calculation of CPQ to do it. I should also note, it might be tempting for the person new to Salesforce CPQ to use a flow for this. Flows are great. People love flows. We use them all the time. Unfortunately, they get used a lot on the quote line, along with triggers. And those cause problems for a variety of reasons that I can elaborate on in a future episode. But for now, suffice it to say that the calculation of monthly recurring revenue, monthly contract value, and annual recurring revenue, annual contract value should be done with price rules at the quote line level so that we can roll it up to the quote, pass it over to the opportunity products, and roll it up to the opportunity. Additionally, we can send that downstream to the order, which can then go to the invoice. We can also send it downstream to the subscriptions or the assets that are created from the quote line. There's all sorts of stuff that we can do with the twin field functionality and in working knowledge of the relationship between various objects in Salesforce. Let's start setting this up. On the quote line, because this is where my data needs to live, I want it to live at that lowest level so that I can roll it up to the highest levels. I need to create two fields, one to capture the monthly recurring revenue and one to capture the annual recurring revenue. I edit my object. This takes me to the setup. In my object manager, I navigate to fields and relationships, create a new field. And here we will create a currency field. We're creating a currency field again because I cannot do a roll-up summary of a formula field. It is not possible in Salesforce. That's a core limitation independent of CPQ. And this is why even if you want to dive down the CPQ rabbit hole and get lost in that world like I did, you still need to understand how Salesforce works as a platform. That's huge. There are many architectural considerations at play when designing these solutions, and we need to be aware of them as part of our CPQ expertise. I'll create a currency field on the quote line called monthly recurring revenue. I typically go with a 16 and 2 on my length and decimal places. If you want, you could put some help text in here. I won't worry about it. I'm going to be a bad Salesforce administrator. Or one that's strapped for time because they have 5,000 other things to worry about. I'll create my second field for annual contract value. It might be tempting again to do this as a formula. Well, I'll just do a formula field. So then I could take the MRR calculation times 12, and then that's going to give me this. And that's so fast. There's more to the story. We're again going to create a currency field because we're going to use price rules and price actions to stamp the values in these fields so that they can be used downstream and as part of a roll-up summary field. This is annual contract value. Again, I like to use 16 and 2 for my length and decimal places. Again, I'm going to ignore my description and help text, although it would be wise of a lot of us, especially as Salesforce continues to enhance the setup and we start to get things like building a flow with GPT and all that kind of stuff that's cooler than doing it the old way, but still not necessarily the right way to do it. Sometimes the slow way is the right way. Plus, even if some sort of AI creates your flow, you still have to understand how flow works to know if the AI did the right thing. There are some online course creators out there who like to peddle their wares and say that, oh, you don't need to learn how flow works because AI is going to do that for you. I vehemently disagree with those online course creators. They're welcome to block me on LinkedIn again, by the way. And I implore you, understand how Salesforce works. It will serve you well in your Salesforce career. I know that comes as a shock. Understand what you're doing for a living. Some people don't agree. Okay, now I have my data collection receptacles. I've got monthly recurring revenue and I have annual recurring revenue fields. I need to update those fields using my CPQ functionality. Again, we're going to use price rules for this. Let's talk about the structure of this price rule and how it's going to work. Normally, I like to go into the app manager and update the apps, the tabs at the top of the CPQ app, because I don't typically give a shit about import formats or solution groups. I'd like to restructure this. Make sure you're spending time each week on admin stuff to make yourself more efficient and effective in your job. You will thank yourself later, and people will wonder how you are so productive. All right. Here are my price rules in this org. So far, I have none. Oh, this is beautiful. I haven't screwed anything up yet. Some clients will have hundreds or even thousands of price rules. That's when things get really dicey. Now, let's think about this process of what needs to happen. When this calculation sequence of CPQ runs, I need to calculate the value for the monthly recurring revenue and the annual contract value, and I need to put that information into the monthly recurring revenue and annual recurring revenue fields that I created on the quote line. I can achieve this with a single price rule that does both things. We haven't gotten into price rules yet, obviously, because this is the first price rule we're creating as part of this series. But I'm going to talk through the high levels of price rules as we go, and hopefully get this thing built by the bottom of the hour, because I need to head into Chicago to see some friends and go see a cover band and eat some food and get away from town for a little bit. All right. While naming my price rules, I like to make it something intuitive. Just calling it price rule 1 is completely unintuitive. I get it. It's a price rule. It's the first one, but it doesn't tell me anything. So here I'll give it a nice descriptive title. There we go. I got real clever. Calculate monthly recurring revenue and annual recurring revenue. You might choose to do some sort of other naming convention because, I mean, in a sense, all price rules calculate kind of. So maybe you want to do something like establish a naming convention where you might use the combination of the scope and the event and what the function of the price rule is in order to name it. That's all up to you. For today, I don't feel like thinking that hard. So we're going to keep it simple. I have two different scopes to choose from when I'm making a price rule. Configurator and calculator. I must choose one and only one in order to save the record. We see that it's a required field. The configurator and calculator pick list values on the evaluation scope field tell CPQ where I should evaluate this price rule to determine whether or not it should run. Configurator price rules evaluate in the configuration screen when I'm configuring a bundle. I have those options and features on the screen. Maybe I have some configuration attributes. Configurator is the evaluation scope that I will use if and when I want my price rule to evaluate during configuration. Calculator is the evaluation scope that evaluates when I'm using that CPQ quote calculation sequence, which is specific to quotes, quote lines, quote line groups. In this case, because my monthly recurring revenue and annual recurring revenue fields exist on the quote line, that's where I'm going to calculate these values. That's where I'm going to inject these values. I need to use the calculator evaluation scope. My conditions met will be all. I'm also not going to have any conditions for this because I always want to calculate MRR and ARR for all quote lines. The simple the determining factor in these conditions is, do I want this to always happen, never happen, or sometimes happen? This is a separate tangent, but those are basically your possibilities. A mentor of mine once said that always is easy and never is easy. Sometimes is hard. Sometimes is where you get complex conditions and can get yourself twisted around. I've done it myself. In this case, I always want to calculate ARR and MRR. Therefore, I'll have no conditions at all. I want this to run all the time. I want this to be an active price rule. And then we have configurator evaluation event and calculator evaluation event. These two fields correspond to the two pick list values over here. Configurator aligns with configurator evaluation event. Calculator aligns with calculator evaluation event. Because I'm using calculator, the configurator evaluation event field is irrelevant. As a best practice, do not populate this field. It won't matter because you're not using it. But for the sake of consistency of configuration and your own future confusion, if you populate them both, leave this null because you're not using it. Next, we have 4 calculator evaluation events to choose from. This is a multi-select pick list, but that doesn't mean that you should choose multiple values. Here's what I see all the time. People don't know what this field does, and so they add all pick list values and they think, perfect, I'm a genius, I've added all things. It's impossible to get this wrong. Not so fast. This has huge implications in terms of the order in which things happen, the size of the transaction, the likelihood that you will override things that happened earlier, and so on. As a best practice, use only one pick list value per price rule. Even though it's multi-select, even if you think you want this to run multiple times, as a best practice, use only one calculator evaluation event. Otherwise, you're doing the same damn thing 4 times. I don't like to repeat myself. So keep that in mind as you're going through this. We can talk longer about the calculator sequence in a future episode. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. For this example, we're going to keep this simple. I'm going to use on calculate, and then actually, no, I'm going to, what am I going to do? I'm going to run it after calculate. I want all my values fully calculated in the price waterfall, and then I want this to determine what my ARR and MRR are. I will save the price rule. As a best practice, I can also put an order in here. This will determine the order in which this price rule runs within the calculator evaluation event to which it was assigned. You can think of the events and the order as the acts and scenes of a play. I have 4 acts: on initialization, before calculate, on calculate, after calculate. Within each of those, I might have 10 different rules that fire in a specific order that I want them to fire. There are a lot of other implications that we'll get to some other time, but I need to keep on track so I can finish this video by the bottom of the hour. For those who criticize my rambling, you're welcome. All right. As I said earlier, I don't need price conditions. I don't need price conditions because I always want this to run. As long as I hit that evaluation event in that evaluation scope, this will run all the time. I also do not need lookup queries because, as you can see, I am not using a lookup object. We can talk about that in a future episode as well. So the only thing I need to worry about are price actions. Price actions are what actually does the update. When I want to inject a value in a field, I use a price action. And even though these are called price rules, they are not specific to price fields. You can update other stuff. You can update text fields. You could update a long text field. You could update a percent field. It doesn't have to be pricing related at all. You might update a color attribute field for all I care. It doesn't really matter. Price rules are to CPQ what flows are to core. I'm going to use this flow to update these things over here, these fields over here. I'm going to use this price rule in CPQ to update these fields over there. When I'm dealing with CPQ records, when I can, I will use price rules. And when I can is 90+% of the time. So if I can use a price rule to make this update to a field on the quote line, on a product option, I will use a price rule to do that. Not going to use a flow. Let's start by creating a new price action and talk you through the fields here. The target object. The target object needs to align to the evaluation scope we selected on the price rule itself. And if you remember, the scope of the price rule was calculator, which means that the only objects that are relevant here are those that are in play when we're calculating a quote, which are the quote and quote line objects. The product option object is for the configurator evaluation scope, because that's where product options live. But once we get to that shopping cart, the quote line editor, we're dealing with quotes and quote lines. My monthly recurring revenue and annual recurring revenue exist at the quote line level, and they're in those target fields that we created. But wait, I don't see my fields. What am I supposed to do? I should probably just give up. Clearly, there's no solution. But wait, there is. I need to add those fields to this pick list. Here's where I want to point something out that's really important. You're going to see a lot of pick lists in CPQ that have the word field in it. Target field, tested field, field. You're going to see these all over the place. Over time, they're going to start to look weird. And they're going to look weird because they will have field API names in the pick list. I don't have enough time to dive into all the specifics and mechanics of it, and it's going to seem really weird when I build it right now. If this is the first time you've ever seen a price rule built in CPQ, just know that this is totally normal for Salesforce CPQ, and it's also totally confusing and feels gross the first time you do it. For now, I'm going to just use a value to hold the spot so that I can save this price action. I'll come back and update it in a minute. Okay. I have created a price action. This is what it looks like. But again, I need to add the field API names of those two fields that I created on the quote line to the target field pick list on the price action object. CPQ, when it calculates, it has compiled all of these price rules in memory to run. And the way that the system talks to itself is through API names, object API names, field API names, etc. On these price actions, along with other places, you'll see these target object, tested object, those fields as well. You cannot add more objects. You could try to add more pick list values. It won't do anything. CPQ only recognizes the out-of-the-box pick list values in these object pick lists. You can, however, update the field pick lists with whatever field you want that is on the object you have selected. Let's go back to the quote line and find those recurring revenue fields that we created. There's our monthly recurring revenue. Wait, didn't I create annual recurring revenue? Oh, I called it annual contract value. Huh. Silly architect. Look at that. See, even though people find me in public places at Salesforce events and go, oh, you're the CPQ guy, I still mess up. Let's try this again. Annual, huh?
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah. Okay, let's get rid of that. Yep. Okay. Some people just call them ARR or MRR, but I like to spell out the full name. Yeah, there we go. Okay. These are the two pick list values that I need to copy to the target field pick list on the price action object so that I can tell CPQ, go to this field and stamp this with a value. And it's a value that I will add in just a minute. I need to go to the setup and edit this object. It is tempting to type it in. Do not type it in. Copy and paste is your friend. You will find yourself frustrated and annoyed and hitting your head against the wall if you type them in, because you're going to forget an underscore. You're going to put something as lowercase that should be uppercase, because here's the nuance. Apex is case insensitive. Salesforce doesn't care if it's capitalized or not. Capital A and lowercase a are the same thing. But CPQ's calculator is JavaScript based, and JavaScript is case sensitive. So a capital A and a lowercase a are completely different things. And if you use a lowercase a when it should be an uppercase A for the field name, for example, CPQ will tell you this field doesn't exist. It will do so in a very obtuse and obscure way that is hard to interpret, but it will essentially tell you that. So what I do is I copy this field API name, create a new field, a picklist field value, and I go over here and I'm going to grab the monthly recurring revenue. And then I will save these two picklist values. There they are. When I go back to the price action, I need to refresh the page because the previous picklist values are what was cached when this page loaded in the first place. Now, when I click edit, I should see my fields. Oh no, I don't. I should probably give up and go home, but I won't because there's a solution here. I forgot to update the controlling field, this little detail up here. I will change my field dependencies and ensure that on the quote line object, since that's where these live, do not add it to the quote and whatever, because we're going to do that with a roll-up summary field. And these fields don't exist on that object yet. The fields exist here and the fields exist here. Let's add them. Now I return to my price action, refresh the page. And now I can use monthly recurring revenue. The value, what am I going to put there? I can put a number of different things into this field. This is the field that is getting updated. I am going to update the monthly recurring revenue field on the quote line object with something. With what? A static value, the number 1, the number 2, or a formula. That's what we're going to do in this case. This is a formula price action. We can use a source field. So if there's another field on the quote line that I want to stamp here, I can do that. A source lookup field. This is if we're using a lookup object that was on that price rule, we can grab a field from that object and we can stamp it into the monthly recurring revenue field, or we can use a source variable, which functions like a roll-up summary field, but it is different. It's a CPQ thing. We can essentially query something and then we can plug in the result. But for us, we're using the formula, and I will grab my formula for monthly recurring revenue and paste it here. Essentially, what this does is it says, if subscription pricing is null, I want you to print null. You could also print 0 if you wanted to. You can inject 0. In this case, it's injecting null. That's a possibility as well. And then we have, if the prorate multiplier is not equal to 0, we're going to take the net total divided by the prorate multiplier times the default subscription term, and we're going to stamp that in. Otherwise, we're going to put the net total. All right. Now, we can expand on this formula and what it means in a future episode. Just trust me when I say this formula works, and that's what we're going to use. You must trust me. I know it's difficult. You should never trust men with beards. It's just a bad idea. Although it is funny. A friend of mine made this for me. Trust the beard.
I was going to say you should have a plaque of that, but you have a plaque of the opposite already.
I do. He's got a 3D printer. The coolest part about this is one piece of plastic.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. These are not glued on. This is one piece of plastic that's been printed.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Thanks, Chuck. All right. Now I need another price action. This one's going to update the monthly recurring. I need one that updates the annual recurring revenue. I will clone this record and make a simple update. Annual recurring revenue. Now I need to clear this out. I'll grab my annual recurring revenue formula, paste this in the formula field. You'll notice that the difference here is the multiplication by 12 right there, 12 months. Okay, we know that 1 month is X. That means that 12 months is 12X. Yay, math. Okay, let's review what we've done. We created a price action. We created a price rule. We gave it an intuitive name so that I could just look at it and kind of understand what's there. The scope is calculator because we want this to evaluate when prices are calculated. That happens on quotes and quote lines. That's why the evaluation scope is calculator. We want the calculator evaluation event to be after calculate. We want the full price waterfall to run. We can talk about that sequence another time. We want this to take those results and use those as inputs for this calculation. I need to know all my prices before I calculate this MRR and ARR, which means the only calculator evaluation event available to me if I want it to run after the price waterfall is the after calculator evaluation event. Teaching this shit is hard because there's so many things to trip over. So many words. So many words. All right, over here, we've got our 2 price actions. The first one updates monthly recurring revenue. The second updates annual recurring revenue. For both of these, I'm using a formula. I will share the formula. You don't have to stare at the screen. I will share it in the article that I put on the website. These are from the original SteelBrick community. They work. Here's the other one. It also works, but we need to test it. And we have 1 minute to test that this is going to work. So I go back to my original quote line. I go to my quote. I edit the lines. All of my price rules and calculation stuff is loading in memory right now in my browser. I hit calculate. Well, technically, I don't have to hit calculate. I could just hit save. I save. The price rules evaluate. They run. They stamp the values in those fields on the quote line, and I'm done. But don't take my word for it. Let's take a look. I navigate to my quote line, and I see in my brand new fancy fields that I created on the quote line, which are, what the hell are they? This is a caching issue. I thought I added those to the page layout.
Yeah,
Let's
the
take a,
compact thing.
huh?
Comfy compact refresh.
Oh, I do it a different way, which I can also show because it's when you're building stuff. I thought I already turned that off, but let's take a look at my page layouts. Annual recurring revenue, monthly recurring revenue, they're already there, but I don't see them here. So here's what I do. Anytime I'm building, especially if it's in a sandbox, sometimes even if it's in production, I'm going to go to the session settings. I thought I already did this. Go to setup, session settings. We're going to scroll up, enable secure and persistent browser caching to improve performance. We want to disable that. I've already disabled that. Why the hell isn't it showing? Because lightning. That's why, because it's lightning. Whatever.
Is it the right page layout? Oh, there it is. Weird.
Yeah. I don't know. It should just show it. Does it show it now? Hey. Hey. Lightning. Salesforce product management team. The fuck? Fix this shit. Anyway. I digress. Okay, so what is a month of this subscription worth? We know that 3 years of 10 PB&J membership subscriptions is $3,600. We know that for 1 month of one of them, it's 10. We know that for 1 month of, for 36 months of one of them, it's 360. Now we know for 10 PB&J Club memberships, we're going to make $100 a month. And we're going to make $1,200 a year. That's how we calculate the monthly recurring revenue and the annual recurring revenue in CPQ. I will include the formulas and maybe screenshots of the architecture and stuff in a post on the website. But this is how it works. This is the starting point, though. Now we can do things with this that we'll talk about in a future episode. But for now, I need to peace out and mic drop. And I'm out. Thanks, Poonam, for showing up.
Thanks, John. Have a good one.
I hope it was helpful.
It was.
Cool. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you later.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.